In this lecture, we are going to look at how we can refresh our data in a pivot table to get the updated data from our source, that is the IMDb table. Here we have a pivot table where we have genre as different rows and the total revenue as the values that we want to see for different genres. Let's say I have a new movie added at the bottom of my table. So let's say that movie is action movie. I'll copy this value for now to understand if there is a change happening to our answer or not. So I'll keep this value here. Let's convert it into a number and remove the decimals. So this is the value that we are having here. What I will do is go back to my IMDb table, go to the last row and add a value at the bottom. Let's say I add a new movie called Pivot Tables Are Amazing. That's the movie name. And let's say we have the genre as action. Hit enter and notice how my table has automatically expanded from your to your, including the new row that we just added. So ideally, our pivot table should also have an updated answer for the total revenue for action once we enter a value for gross revenue. So let's put in a really high value here, let's say something like this, and hit enter so that whenever we have a change in our pivot table, we can easily detect it because this is a high value. So I'll go back to my pivot table and have a look at the action value. As you can see, this value is exactly the same as what we had earlier before entering the new movie. So why hasn't it changed? Why do we not have the updated value here? Haven't we used a pivot table? We have, right? So why don't we have the updated value? Well, that's because pivot tables are a little bit different. When it comes to pivot tables, even though we have used a table, we need to go to pivot table analyze and simply click on refresh button here. The shortcut for the same will be Alt F5 key. As you can see here, it's Alt plus the function file, the F5 key here. So you can use this or you can go to analyze and click on refresh to refresh your data. Now, if you are wondering, why do we have to refresh it separately? Don't we already have the table as our source data? Well, that's the question that I also had when I was starting to learn pivot tables. And it didn't really make sense to me as to why we have a separate refresh button in order to get the updated data. It should ideally happen automatically. But there's a very strong reason behind this. Understand that Excel is being used by more than 700 million people in the entire world. And all of them will have different laptops, PCs, MacBooks, or whatever device they are on. And all of them will have different processing power. Pivot tables are really processor heavy. It requires a lot of processing power because it does a lot of calculations on the fly. That is within seconds, and I would say within milliseconds as well. In that case, if it requires a lot of processing power, it might sometimes crash the entire Excel software. Does Microsoft want something like that? Not really. So, if the pivot tables always automatically do all these calculations as and when we update our data, there might be a good chance that Excel software will crash because of it. Because pivot tables are continuously doing all these heavy calculations every single second, every single millisecond as well. And that's a lot of processing power. So instead of Excel crashing and Microsoft not wanting that, what we have here is a separate refresh button. So Microsoft is telling you, listen, I don't want your Excel to crash. So that's why we have a separate button here. You can simply click on this and have the data updated. No need to have automatic refresh because if you have that, there might be an Excel crash leading because of that. So instead of having something like that, we have the refresh button here. You can click on it and notice how my value changed. You can go ahead, change the number formatting of it to a number to remove the E plus 12. And there we have the number that we are supposed to have, which is completely different from what we have here, right? We have a much bigger value because of the values that we have added there. This is something that you need to do in order to update your data. You can use the shortcut Alt plus F5 or go to Analyze and click on Refresh button. This also comes to the second question. It leads us to the second question, which is, then why did we convert our data into a table? Why couldn't we simply keep the source data as a bunch of cells and come and create our pivot table? We as it is have to click on refresh, right? So what is the point of having a table created and then using that? There won't be any difference. Don't you think so? Well, the answer to it is actually no. Understand, when we use tables, we are reducing the step-by-step process that we need to have here in order to refresh our data to only one step. The one step being clicking on refresh and having your data refreshed. Because the source data has automatically been expanded and it has automatically been a part of your source data for pivot table. But if we simply refer to a bunch of cells without converting it into a table, then our source data would still not include the new movie. And we would have to perform two steps here. Before clicking on refresh, we would have to go to change data source, click on change data source, and select the entire new data, including the new row that we are having, and then click on OK. So first we had to change the data source in case we didn't have a table created, and then click on refresh. So here, by making a table and using the table as a pivot table source, we are avoiding the first step because our source data has automatically been expanded. And that's the real benefit of using a table in a pivot table as a source. So once we have that, we can simply click on refresh and have our data refreshed. Now, if I go back to my original data, go to the last row and delete this. Right click, delete. Again, if I come back to pivot table, the values will still not update while deleting something. That is why shrinking our source data. We also need to click on refresh or press the shortcut Alt F5. So I'll go to pivot table analyze and click on refresh. And now we have the old value back. This is how you can refresh your data. Even if you remove something or even if you add something, you can go to refresh and get the new value. That's how you can refresh your data in Excel for a pivot table. That's it for this lecture, and I'll see